Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jamie Fontaine, and I will be walking you through my research looking at how games like Dungeons and Dragons impacts empathy towards marginalized communities. For this study, we, as a team, decided we wanted to do it because of a lot of factors. We have, as a community, a passion for games like Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of us in the research team had experience with it and wanted to incorporate it into our studies. Similarly, as counselors, we are very aware of the importance that empathy plays in human development, in socializing, and in mental health in general. For myself, I am also keenly aware of what marginalization can do to people and those experiences and how challenging that can be. And I wanted to incorporate it in my studies as well. To begin, let's look at what marginalization is. Broad strokes, marginalization refers to the experiences of prejudice or discrimination that a person may experience. Many communities and people experience marginalization, and as such, they experience related mental health difficulties and poorer well-being. There are many struggles that can come from the prejudice and discrimination that these communities face. Looking at ways to address this, helping people learn to be more empathetic towards these communities has been one tool that has been proposed. Empathy, for this study, refers to the ability for people to experience the feelings of other people. In a social context, empathy allows people to understand and gain insight into the experiences of others. For some, this may give them the ability to reveal some of their own biases and prejudice, and in some circumstances may inspire positive change. Based on this, empathy can be a valuable tool for addressing marginalization in the right circumstances. But in order to be effective, it needs to be engaging. That brings us to Dungeons and Dragons. For the unaware, Dungeons and Dragons is a very engaging tabletop role-playing game that allows people to come together as a group and play in a creative, free environment where they get to take on the role of various characters and explore various stories. In counseling, games like D&D have been found as effective interventions for various things like self-efficacy, self-awareness, anxiety, and, yes, empathy, and the development thereof. Similarly to that, D&D players, people that play the game, have also been shown to have higher levels of empathy when compared to non-D&D players, showing that perhaps D&D could be used as an intervention to address empathy in relation to marginalized people. That brings us to our main research question, which follows. With consideration of the mechanisms of engagement, exposure, and self-exploration, how do players of Dungeons and Dragons interact with and make sense of the inclusion of marginalized people, characters, and narratives? And how does this shape their empathy and understanding towards these individuals? This question is asked both to identify how D&D can be used in counseling, find new ways of using it in counseling, in allowing people to find empathy or develop empathy, but also to see how D&D players currently experience empathy and come to understand marginalized communities. And this question is what has inspired the research that we have conducted. For this study, we decided to use a qualitative research approach This was chosen to allow us to gain understanding and insight into D&D players' experiences with the game, empathy, and marginalized communities. Furthermore, to address this, we chose for analysis thematic analysis as a way to help us identify common experiences and patterns between different participants. To do this, we constructed semi-structured interviews, which we chose to do to allow us to learn the thoughts of the participants individually, but also allow us to stretch the script and expand into better understanding the unique experiences of participants. If participants had a specific experience, we could follow up on it and allow them to engage further with the interview and give us more information on their experiences. As for the participants themselves, no major restrictions were given. The only requirements were that participants had to have some level of experience with Dungeons and Dragons, as well as being 18 or older. This was done to allow for a general view of D&D players' experiences and give us a wider understanding of those experiences. For this study, critical adherence to ethical frameworks were of course considered, including that of the British Psychological Society, the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and the National Counselling Professional Society. Their ethical frameworks were maintained throughout the entire process of research. Before interviews were conducted, all participants had to sign consent forms and were informed of their rights, such as their right to withdraw and their right to consent. They were also given a brief debrief statement outlining a little bit about the study. During interviews, all of this was repeated and consent was reattained. Furthermore, during interviews, researchers kept careful observation of participants for any signs of distress so that we could acknowledge and be aware of them and support them if there were any issues. After the interviews, participants approved transcripts of their interviews before they could be used and were given a debrief statement outlining the entirety of the study. Also, they were given signposting to different support services and options available, should they feel it necessary for whatever reason. Again, they were of course allowed the option to withdraw from the study at any time. With that brings us to the results of our study and the interviews. After careful consideration of the information that was presented by participants and careful analysis of their statements, I identified two primary themes as well as pairs of sub-themes for each of them. These primary themes were emergence of empathy and foundational empathy. The first major theme, emergence of empathy, relates to how players expressed empathy development. Almost every participant in the study expressed that they developed empathy in some way. For some of them, this was new empathy. For others, it was empathy that they already had on some level, but that it was further developed by their experiences through Dungeons and Dragons. And this empathy was both general empathy and specific to empathy towards different marginalized communities, depending on specific participants' experiences. This theme was then broken down into two sub-themes, the first of which is perspective taking. This relates to how many participants identified that the primary mechanism, or one of the primary mechanisms for which they developed empathy, was by recognizing new perspectives that they were exposed to through Dungeons and Dragons. In this, they witnessed either characters or narratives or even fellow players that were part of a marginalized community. Being exposed to that and seeing these new perspectives, especially in roleplay scenarios, give them the opportunity to explore these new perspectives and think and reflect, developing their empathy. Continuing off of that, the second subtheme, confronting different, furthers this by not only allowing them to see the perspectives of others, but look at those new perspectives and directly compare it to their own, identifying that this person's experience is different from mine, this character's is different from mine, and recognizing the struggles that marginalized people have and comparing it to possibly the privilege of themselves, or even their own marginalization. See, I've been marginalized for being in this community. I'd never thought about what that's like for this other community. The second major theme is foundational empathy. This theme relates to the idea that many participants expressed, that they were already very empathetic individuals, whether generally or specifically towards marginalized people. Many participants stated flat out that, yes, I'm already a rather empathetic person and I hold a lot of empathy for these communities. Some of them also demonstrated this in the first subtheme, sensitivity and storytelling. In this, many participants demonstrated that they had empathy that was already existing when they started playing D&D through their sensitivity in storytelling. By this, for some, they would use the game as a sort of escapism, mentioning how, why would I want to face the discrimination, this marginalization that faces the real world? I'm very aware of that, and I'm very concerned about it. This game is my escape, it's my fun place. Let me explore something new, let me fight dragons, let me do something different. For others, they thought it was very important to include these stories or characters, but to have marginalized characters be marginalized in a Dungeons and Dragons setting, they have to have someone play the role of the bigot that's being discriminatory towards them. And almost every participant that mentioned this stated how uncomfortable playing that role made them, that it left a sour taste in their mouth. That was not something that they enjoyed. But they still believed it was important to role-play these scenarios to explore the situations that these people face. The second subtheme under this relates to a notion that a few participants pointed out. Many of them stated that Dungeons and Dragons attracts empathetic people. They stated that in their experience, most players of D&D were rather empathetic, even suggesting that the game attracts empathetic people by nature, or that people that play the game are more empathetic by nature. Based on those results, we can find several things. For one, it seems that yes, Dungeons and Dragons does impact the development of empathy. Participants across the board indicated that playing D&D helped them develop empathy in some form or another, whether it was new or old. Similarly, we see some of the mechanism of that. For some of them, it was through exposure or self-reflection, being able to witness new perspectives and compare that to the self gave them opportunities to engage with these experiences of marginalized people and develop empathy for it. Another important part of this is the idea that D&D players are, in some way, possibly empathetic by nature, or more commonly empathetic. Some participants mentioned this idea. It also aligns with research that suggests that D&D players show higher levels of empathy towards things. Before we move on, it's important that we address some of the potential limitations of the study. The study is a qualitative study, and thus it focused on depth as opposed to breadth. And as a result, results are likely less generalizable than they would be otherwise, though it allowed us to get a deeper dive into the experiences of some players. Similar to this, thematic analysis was used, and thematic analysis is beholden to researcher bias as it is interpretative. However, this could also be a strength in some form, as that interpretation involves engagement. Another note is that there were several researchers on this project, but all of the researchers had different research questions. This could have limited the depth of interview questions. Without this, questions could have been more direct. Looking at what these results mean, there are a few implications. From a theoretical angle, these results line up a lot with that of social learning theory, particularly with the notions of modeling and reinforcement. Participants would model the behavior of other players in games like D&D. Similarly, they would be reinforced to behave proper and be accepting of the people at the table and the characters thereof, because they were being rewarded with the game and the community that it created. On another note, we see that in this study, empathy is a social experience, which has been suggested in the past. On the practical side, there are a couple major ideas that could be taken away from this. For one, counselors or any other professionals working with people looking to become more empathetic or understand different types of people could view games like Dungeons and Dragons as opportunities for their clients in these situations to possibly overcome or address their prejudice. In a similar vein, based on the idea that Dungeons and Dragons players are seemingly more frequently empathetic, it could be a good place for at-risk individuals to find community. This, of course, includes marginalized people, but it could link to other potentially at-risk individuals, such as those with social anxiety. All of that being said, it is very important that care be given when doing this, because not all D&D groups are created equally. Some participants did mention this as well, but of course there are going to be outliers. Finally, let's look at some future studies and their potential. Future studies could look at those aforementioned implications and create and look at potential interventions that use D&D to develop empathy or utilize it as an empathetic space. Regardless, researchers could conduct a campaign designed to expose participants, the players, to characters or narratives that evoke empathy or community in some way. This could be a mixed method study using both qualitative and quantitative research. You could use thematic analysis to find those commonalities and experiences, while also using quantitative research measures to get some concrete numbers to help analyze the results. Lastly, I want to give everyone a bit of a takeaway. Based on these findings, games like Dungeons and Dragons may have several uses for counselors as a form of intervention, whether to support the development of empathy or just to create safe spaces for vulnerable people. Thank you everyone for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time to journey with me through this experience and my findings. Thank you.